We're on air. Hi, good afternoon, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us today for this very exciting webinar. We've got a great friend, a great champion of women business owners, Miss Shereen Wardakhan. She really has been supporting us for a while in WEConnect South Africa, and she's a great friend. She's off to live in Brazil. So we're going to adopt Brazil, so she still remains as part of South Africa because we cannot give her up. But today we've got a fantastic title. This is part 2 of a webinar series that we're running with Shereen. Today is about winning competitive RFPs, strategies and tactics to submitting an A+ proposal for corporate opportunities. So thank you all. I know you have great expectations of this session. We really would appreciate it if you would type your expectations in the chat. The way we're going to run the session is that we want you to communicate and interact with us through the chat. We're going to minimize the voice interaction to minimize the technical hiccups that we can have, but please use the chat. I'm going to be keeping an eye on it, and Vanessa's also here with me. So we've got a really exciting agenda to go through for this afternoon. It's a 90-minute session. There is going to be a case study that Shereen is going to work through. We're not going into breakaway rooms. We'll work on the case study all together, and then we'll look at some of the ideas and inputs that she gives to us around getting to have stronger and better RFPs. So I'm not going to introduce Shereen anymore. I know her first slide is all about Shereen and her great life. Every now and again, you may hear her dogs bark, but that's okay. We know we're working from home. So Shereen, thank you so much again for being so amazing. And I'm gonna hand over straight to you to take us through the session. We are gonna stop at least 2 times during the session to take Q&A. So put your questions in the chat box for us, and then we'll make sure we stop at the end with enough time to also cover any outstanding questions. Shereen, over to you.
Thank you, Jean. Okay, so let me start with the bio before we get into the agenda. So as Jean has very nicely introduced me, so I have been working with WEConnect over the past, I guess, 2+ years when I was still with P&G, and that was more than a year ago. So for people who were in the first webinar, you might see that my title has changed. And the reason for that is it has been announced effective August 1st that I have taken on Latin America to be based out of Brazil with McCain Foods, for those who also know it here. The reason I will be based out of Brazil is because we are coming up with a new manufacturing site. So up until this moment, McCain is known in Brazil, but we don't produce in Brazil. We actually import most of the products from the manufacturing site in Argentina. So yeah, so I'm very excited. I will hopefully be moving in November. And that will be the 5th country that I live in. I have lived and worked in Dubai, and that's where I had started off with P&G. I'm Egyptian, so obviously have lived in Egypt for a while as well. Not so long, actually, probably just 10 years. It was during my university times in high school. I have also lived a couple of years in Nigeria, and you can see I'm very proud with that costume that I had there. So with my gele, and it was great times in Nigeria, a bit more than 2 years. And then I have been in South Africa for a bit more than 4 years now, and looking forward to my new journey. In terms of professional experience, I have always been in procurement since I was with P&G. So it's been over 13 years now in procurement. I am obsessed about traveling. So, but funny enough, I did manage this lockdown gracefully, I would say. I've been to 47 countries, 21 of them are actually in Africa. Because I'm very passionate about that, and I wanted to make sure that I'm able to I'm able to show people, you know, how the African countries and kind of change a bit of the idea and the narrative around that. I have been also contacted very recently by the PNG alumni group. So there's like a big PNG alumni network, and there is part of it, there's a grants committee. So basically what we do in the grants committee is we assess non-profit organizations who want to who want access to, you know, let's say a yearly fund. And I have just joined that. The applications have closed back in September. So this is my first experience actually with them, where I'll be like assessing a few of the applications that we got. So if anyone wants to connect on that, I know Jean has also been helpful to spread the word a bit, because I would love to see how many of the nonprofit organizations here in South Africa, who I know do a great job, can actually, you know, be qualified to apply for next year. And then on a personal side, I have a guest house that I built, designed and built, and done everything from scratch. It is in Egypt, south of Egypt by the Nile. So if you've seen that picture, that's actually the Nile there. And it's been running since 2013, won awards from Expedia back in 2015. Obviously, just like a lot of people, we've struggled during the lockdown, you know, with no business basically. But thankfully we're back. Things are much better in Egypt, and they've opened up, you know, tourism. I mean, airports have been open since July even. So yeah, so hopefully looking forward to also receiving guests again. Okay, so that's pretty much about me. I will go through the agenda, and then I'll just stop for a second to see if there's more expectations that I need to note down. Okay, so we're basically doing the welcome and introductions. We're gonna go through, like, you know, the slides. What we're basically going to cover is, I'd like to first let you understand the internal process of corporates, kind of like from A to Z, of how do we go about, oh, we need an RFP, and then how do we go through even our internal, you know, assessments and evaluations, and how do we you know, get internal approvals and so on. And why I think this is important is because sometimes, you know, the suppliers would get a bit like frustrated or agitated or like worried, like, why is it taking so long and so on. So once you also try to understand the standard process and the amount of decision making also that is involved in this process, you would somehow understand, you know, why things sometimes take longer than you would expect them to, and so on. We're also going to go through like types of requests basically. So like RFIs, RFPs, like what's the difference between them? We're going to go through the case study. Before the case study actually, so we're just going to open like quickly for a quick Q&A there. And then we're going to get into the case study. We'll try to tell you what an ideal brief would look like. So why this is very important as well is because the way you would have the right tips for a good proposal is when you also get a good brief. So you need to be able to understand how an ideal brief looks like, what you should be asking corporates for if you feel that there's missing information. And then from the case study, we're actually going to go through like a total cost of ownership analysis. So I'll take you through pretty much an actual case study. We've changed names and numbers and all that stuff, but it's really how far we would go into an analysis for you to understand that. And then we'll have the closing Q&A. Yeah, so that's pretty much the agenda.
Hi, Shereen. So far, you know, it's the same thing, competitive pricing tips to make proposals stand out, and then the service and non-service responses have been the expectations so far, plus a few congratulations, Shereen, messages.
Thank you. Awesome. Okay, so should I kick it off then?
Yeah, please go ahead.
All right, so let's start with the process. It's a busy slide, but it's as busy as we get in the process, okay? So basically how it starts is some function of the business decides that there is a need to purchase a good or a service, okay? So that's where it starts from. Once we understand that there's a need, what we go back to ask and when I say we, it's procurement, what we would then go and ask from the internal customer is to share a brief or what we would call a scope of work, right? So where they would actually, where they would outline, you know, all the details and when they need it, by when they need it, what is the success criteria, what are the KPIs that they're looking for? Because more than anyone, as much as we have the information and we can help as procurement, the internal customer more than anyone actually knows what they need, right? And how would they see that the service that they're getting is actually successful? So hence there's always a joint evaluation and assessment that comes from procurement, from a commercial side and somehow a technical side where we also have the market knowledge, but then the internal customer also has to have their way of assessing from a technical standpoint. Then we, as procurement, we decide what is our best sourcing approach, or according to a sourcing strategy. So we normally have sourcing strategies for, you know, important services and material. And when we have this kind of request, we look at back at our sourcing strategy and we decide, okay, do I actually have an incumbent that I'm very happy with? And all I need to do is, you know, extend with them and just renegotiate a few terms and conditions or prices and so on? Or do I actually think that there's value in inviting new vendors and then launching a bid in that case, right? Usually when we have a new vendor, a due diligence process is very highly recommended. And a due diligence process can be many things, right? It can be assessing the financial stability of that new vendor, assessing their, you know, their past experience, their clientele base, like who have they actually worked with, understanding, you know, their even things as far as their sustainability, do they have a vision for that and so on. If it's going to be more of purchasing of goods from that new vendor, then way more due diligence happens where we, you know, actually we go with people from safety and quality, and we actually go and see their premises and how, depending on also what we're producing, right? If we're getting from them things that are go into our packaging and hygiene and all of that stuff, then there's, you know, quite a rigorous process of their housekeeping that we actually would need to do a due diligence for, right? So these are all things you need to bear in mind that most corporates are actually going to assess you for, right? So it is not necessarily just a good price and so on, or something that is good on paper. Corporates would actually send people to sit down, understand your hierarchy, understand how your organization works, understand, you know, the seniority of your people. So one of the things we ask for when it's with new vendors is like, give us your org structure, give us your turnover, give us like whatever information would help us to understand whether that's a reliable supplier or not. Again, of course, depending on the kind of how strategic the service or the product we're looking for, you know, we might not go as far if we're buying maybe, I don't know, like office supplies or something. So like, there's a whole range of how far this goes, right? Then when let's say we decided that we're going to launch an RFQ or an RFP, and I'll get to that later. Take it as an RFQ for now. We go back to the vendors. There should be a clear deadline of what we're going to do. In many cases, we might also request a non-disclosure agreement, or it's called an NDA or a CDA, so a confidentiality disclosure agreement or a non-disclosure agreement, right? Again, depending on what kind of service we're looking at. So I'll give you an example again, because there's a lot happening in my scope now in Brazil, because we're coming up with a new factory. Many of the suppliers work with our competitor there, right? So for them to be exposed to our package of the RFQ and the RFP and all that stuff, we need to make sure that we're trying to keep our information as protected as possible. And even going on, right? So even going on, we might choose to work with suppliers who work with competitors. But for example, if we have a promotion that is going to go on our packaging, we want to make sure that, you know what, this promotion and this artwork is not going to like be leaked out before we actually go in the market with the promotion. So yeah, so this is what we, sometimes the CDA is needed. What we also very highly recommend, and these are things you can also be asking for, is we ask for the, we actually put the contract template in the RFQ package so that we avoid any surprises, right? So it's kind of like a prerequisite. If you're going to quote for this and you've read the contract, it kind of means that you are okay, and the negotiations will be very minor negotiations, nothing major in terms of like clauses that we have to like go back and forth and then involve legal and so on, right? So these are all things we try to put in our process. And again, not all corporates do that. It is from my personal experience that we have found that putting all of these things together is what actually makes it run like way smoother than normal, okay? Then we ask for the offers. Obviously, we would schedule sessions with vendors to go through the proposals to make sure that we understand everything that is clear. If any additional requests come from one vendor, or like, let's say a vendor asks for extra time versus the deadline, or they ask questions that we might not have thought about when we were, writing the brief or the scope of work, we make sure that whatever we answer that vendor with needs to go back to all the vendors as well, right? So they are allowed the same time to resubmit if there's an extension. If there's any clarifications, it kind of like goes to everyone. Once we complete our final round of recommendations, we usually then would align with the internal customer. And in many cases, internal customers are also present in those sessions where we have with the vendors, right? Because it's not only commercial, we're also wanting to ask about certain technical capabilities or so on. So usually the sessions are joint sessions. And then we would have an alignment with the internal customer on who we actually, usually we would come with a recommendation, and then we would align that with the internal customer. If there are any, things that are not aligned, we would take more time and make sure that, we get together again and everyone is happy with the final choice. And usually also to avoid that is why we ask our internal customer to give us their scope of work, right? And their KPIs and their success criteria, so that when we're actually sitting and we say, okay, listen, we are going to, price gets like a weighting of 50%, and then lead time 20%, and so on. Recommended, would have first from some would to go to my 1 5 million, actually might need to go to like a 1, and the
She just dropped off. Hello, everyone. I think Shereen we just lost sound. Can you pause the recording? We're just trying to wait. Awesome, Vanessa.
Apologies, everyone.
Yeah, can you see the slide that Vanessa's showing?
Yes. Yeah, Vanessa, will you continue sharing, or do you want me to?
We can continue if you want, if it makes sense.
Okay, that's fine. Yeah, I'll just tell her when to move on. Okay. So I was at point number 7, and I was at the part where I was saying that, the amount of approvals we need to get sometimes is what makes also the process a bit lengthy in some cases. Then once we've got so we do not inform the winning vendor until we actually have our approvals in place. And then we can actually go into informing the winning vendor. It's also very important that we try to send regret letters or call the vendors or, you know, the ones who lost and kind of give them a basic reason of why they were not chosen, right? So I think that is a very good practice. And if you, you know, if you don't get those calls, try to request, you know, and take it from the, you know, take it from the angle of trying to improve things and not trying to, because when the decision is made basically, right? So it's not really gonna change anything, but it's important for you to be able to understand why did you, you know, not get chosen? Was it something about the proposal that was not matching? Was it just merely cost or was it anything else? Okay. Then usually after that, we would then sign the contract. In some cases, a detailed contract might not be needed, and just a service level execution agreement would be enough. Then the job owner would issue the PO, and moving on, we would continuously measure the supplier versus the agreed KPIs. And it depends whether, you know, again, on the relationship with the supplier and how important and big the service is. We might be doing that on a monthly, quarterly, or annual basis, right? Okay. So Vanessa, I keep seeing the chat coming up. I guess these are the inputs from people, right?
You can close the chat box your side if it's coming up, just close it.
Okay, cool. All right, can you move to the next slide, please? Oh, Vanessa, sorry, can I share from my side because I had added something on that slide? Thank you.
Okay, while you're doing that, let me just read a few more. Expectations. How can a new entrant with no strong financials get opportunities? The other one is we never get reasons when we are unsuccessful, and we request constructive feedback to understand what our shortfalls are so that we can better meet the company's objectives going forward. We never get any responses ever. Yeah, I think that's the ones that I hadn't read before.
Okay. Okay. All right, so I'll move on to the types of requests that you might actually get from corporates, okay? So I guess the very common ones that everyone kind of hears of is RFP and RFQ, maybe possibly also RFI. So you can kind of like not really look at ROI and RFT. These are not very common. But let me help you with the difference, right? So the RFI is basically a request for information. And procurement people would sometimes do that when they are approaching a new market. So we don't know what is out there in the market, who are the suppliers out there. So we're trying to get as much information to be able to do kind of a bit of a market analysis and supplier analysis before we actually get into building a scope of work or a brief out for an RFQ or an RFP. So you would see here, it says that we don't have enough information. We're not necessarily committed to buying. So sometimes an RFI goes out and it's not followed by anything else. It's really just to understand, and then we might make certain decisions and say, okay, you know what? We're not gonna run an RFQ at this point. An example could be a make versus buy, right? So we could do an RFI to understand if there's actually a supplier, like sourcing this service from a supplier would be actually better than us doing it in-house. So we could do an RFI, end up realizing that, you know, we're good if we do it in-house, and that's about it. So do not always expect anything necessarily out of an RFI. And some suppliers in some cases reject, you know, going into RFIs because they doubt that the information they're going to give is not going to be maintained properly by corporates. And corporates are just doing it for the fun of it, and they know exactly which supplier they're going to go with. So these are things that we have sometimes faced with RFIs. So again, we try to be very clear on why we're running an RFI and making sure that we're not making any promises of any commitments beyond that, if we actually think that nothing might come out of it, okay? The second one is the ROI, again, so registration of interest and so on, is pretty much like an RFI. It's again to do a bit of like screening, and again, purchases, like procurement is not committed to buying and so on. An RFP is the request for proposal, and usually the request for proposal is when procurement and the internal customer have a case that they're not so sure how to go about it, right? So an example of that would be very much in the marketing field, where we would, for example, say, I want to reach a target, the target market, my target market is, women from 15 to 40, and I would like to have a reach of, I don't know, like 100,000 reach and so on. And I know what I want out, like I know what they want to know about my product, but I don't really know how to do it, right? So like the agency might come and say, okay, we are going to do it via digital. We're actually, we're going to do it via an event, or we're going to do it via a direct to consumer kind of campaign. So these are things where we would expect an RFP, where we know what our outcome needs to be, but not necessarily how to do that. Okay. So same thing sometimes also with like services like end of line packing, for example. We would say, okay, I want to pack 100 cases in X number of minutes. I don't know how many people I need to do that. The agency or the labor company needs to figure out how to do that for me, right? You wouldn't necessarily see that with goods, because goods are very specific on the specifications. We know exactly what it would, like if it's a packaging, we know exactly what thickness of film we want. We know if it's a sort of oil, we know that, that we're frying our potatoes in, for example, we know exactly what the specifications of the oil could be. So we don't go about an RFP with those. Then you have the RFT, which is not very common as well. The request for tender, again, it's, it's a tender and you're requesting for a submission to meet the criteria of your tender. Then you have the RFQ, which is you have very set defined criteria or specification. Mostly it's around price, not necessarily, but mostly. And there's a commitment to buying, obviously, and that is used more with material, so like goods, because you know exactly what you want at the specification. And if someone meets the specification, then the other deciding factor would pretty much be their price. Yeah, and that's about the kind of requests that you would get. Okay. So why is it important to get a clear scope, right? Why is it important for us to send a clear scope and for you to receive a clear scope? Okay. First of all, it becomes an apple-to-apple comparison, right? So like we're not getting a different proposal from everyone that is kind of like, okay, but how do I compare what supplier A gave me versus supplier B if it's not the same, if it's not meeting the same criteria, right? You reduce obviously the project risks, and the vendors are able to respond with a concise and detailed proposal or bid. So you know what I'm asking you for, and hence you know what you need to be proposing. Obviously, poorly written statements of work result in like we're not meeting quality expectations. There's a lot of like back and forth, and then you say no, but I submitted and you agreed, and then I say yeah, but I wanted that extra thing, and you say okay, but it wasn't in the scope of work. It's going to cost you X, And then the procurement person gets very upset and like, why are you charging me more? You've given me an initial proposal. So you get into all sorts of like disagreements, and it's just not a healthy discussion. While on the other hand, a well-written statement of work is you're going to be able to do your planning, your coordination of your resources. We can all forecast when everything is going to happen. We're not going to be confused about anything. We're all on the same page and everyone understands the roles and responsibilities. Okay. All right, so what to look for in RFPs, okay? And again, this is very important because that is what you need to kind of like create your proposal around, okay? So the scope of work needs to obviously have the background, right? So you need to have the background of like, you know, the company, if you haven't heard about it, what exactly are they trying to achieve and so on, what is the business objective? Very important dates, like what is the date of your submission? What's the deadline of your submission? What is the date of your start of execution date? So basically, when is the plan to have, you know, having to be up and running? And hence, when do you need to deliver? So for example, if a start of execution is, let's say in June, and you know that there needs to be some sort of like building inventory and qualifications and whatever, then you probably might need to deliver like 3 months in advance. So all of these dates have to be, you know, very clear. And then the deliverables, right? Like what is expected from you in terms of your deliverables, and which are basically your KPIs. Then it's good for you to also understand the process, right? Is it going to just be a negotiation? Is it going to be a best bid? So you know what, whoever gives me the best bid gets it. I'm not going to spend time on negotiating. So these are usually the, you know, the cases where it is really price sensitive and there's not much importance or weight given to the kind of, you know, it's kind of like a commodity. It's not like a very, it's not something we need to worry about the quality. So in that case, we would say best bid is the winning bid, right? In some cases, which is very common with RFQs and RFPs, we would bid and then we would negotiate. So let's say we would bid and then we would say, okay, I'm taking the top 3 out of maybe 6 or whatever, and these are the 3 I'm actually going to negotiate with. So there's a bit of a screening process that happens after the bid and then another step of negotiation. Then the agreement type. So it's also important, like I said, to understand whether it's going to be a contract. What are the clauses in this contract? Are you able to meet those contract clauses or not? Or is it just going to be a PO and, you know, and so like nothing very binding for a very long period, right? So it's just like you deliver once and that's about it, or it's a contract that is going to be a year or 2 years that you have to be, you know, you bear in mind, put the right resources behind it and so on. Important also for you to understand are the payment terms. You don't want to also get into that discussion right at the end once, you know, you're very close to getting the deal and then, oops, it's 120 days, you know? So you also try to understand what the payment terms are. And again, what normally, ideally corporates would do is to put all of these things up front. Again, it saves everyone's time. So yeah, just trying to understand, is it going to be in advance? Is it going to be from the date of invoice? And from the date of invoice, how many days? Is it 30, 60, 90, 120? Or is it from the date of goods in receive? In some cases, it can be actually a scheduled payment. So with machinery, for example, and equipment, the way we would do payment terms is we would say, okay, you get like a 10, 20% in advance or like as a deposit. And then when you're halfway through like preparing the equipment and you're getting the equipment together, you get maybe another 10%. And then once you send the equipment to our site, you get another 10%. And then when you do the installation and the commissioning, you get another 20% and so on, right? So also payment scheduling can be very common and could be something that, you know, when you feel like payment terms are a bit too tight and you're not able to, you know, kind of like meet those payment terms, try to think of how you can discuss with corporates, okay, like kind of like a payment schedule, right? Then what's also important is that you understand the assessment criteria. How are you going to be assessed? Is it just cost? Is it cost and lead time and geographical coverage? It could be one of those or way more than those as well. So the assessment criteria can be so many other things. These are just examples and not limited to that. In many cases, you know, there are corporates where, yes, we would pay a little bit of a premium to make sure that we have a better lead time. So if I'm getting the same product locally or imported, and funny enough, even imported can come in cheaper, I might actually say, okay, no, you know what? I just want to be sure that if this product is local, I'm never going to have to meet any problems like, oh, the port is closed, there's a delay, I cannot get my goods and material in time, and then you're kind of risking a production delay at your plant. So, I mean, it really depends on what the criteria is going to be and what are the top important points for that. And then try to also understand if there is any sort of like qualification that will be needed. Like I mentioned early, what sort of due diligence might be needed, technical qualifications. So again, there are companies, I recall in P&G, we could spend sometimes more than a year actually qualifying a supplier on a packaging material because it's just not running on our lines, even though they believe they're meeting the specs and so on. So you also need to understand whether there's going to be a certain qualification period whereby, yes, you win the bid right now and they're spending time qualifying you, but then after a year, you kind of just need to make sure that you will be able to maintain in principle the kind of submission that you gave. Obviously, cost may differ somehow depending on the changes in the market in a year, but in that case, what you could then do is say, okay, this is how we're going to revise the price in a year's time. So again, everyone is on the same page, because what we have also seen suppliers sometimes do is, okay, cool, they win the bid, we go through the qualification, they know it's a lengthy process, they know it's taken us effort and time to qualify them, and then boom, it's like, oh, they double their price. So that's not a way you want to, you know, to also be working with your with the corporates, because I mean, you could do that and corner them in a while, but that's going to be the end of it. Okay. All right. So we're stopping here for a quick Q&A.
Thanks, Shereen. I've got two questions that were sent to me. One was on the payment terms that you touched on, that I had a project that I assumed payment terms were 30 days. It was only after delivery that I then found that it was actually 60 days, and I was told it was too late to change. Some corporates don't let you know, they let you assume it's 30 days. Then the other comment that came through, a lot of blurb, but the gist of it is a lot of this information is not told to us upfront. It's almost a guessing game sometimes. How do we get all this information upfront?
Okay, so I think it's pretty much the same answer for both, because, and that's the reason why we're doing this kind of webinar, is for you to know what is your right to ask, right? You should be able to ask all of these things up front if you see them missing in a brief or in a scope of work or whatever, right? So like corporates are obliged to answer that. It could be that they're, you know, I mean, they don't have like a very clear process of how they kind of put in an RFQ or an RFP or an SOW. So they just don't think about it, right? They also make the assumption that, you know, that it's going to be like 60 days or whatever, right? So it's okay. It's the purpose of this is that no one makes assumptions, right? Neither the corporates nor you. So that's why if they miss it out, you just go back and say, we want an answer to this. What are your payment terms going to be? What are, you know, will we need to be qualified? So just go back and ask all of these questions if you see any of these missing, which is why I'm sharing those, right? Because none of this is confidential. None of this is something that should not be shared at the beginning. And it saves even the corporate. So you might actually be making things easier for them if they don't have, you know, that kind of like really tight process of how they run their RFQs.
And then another one just came in. Hi, Shereen, thanks for your great energy over the years. Sorry, I was just coughing, so my voice sounds funny. My question is, how do we scale up to attract the global contracts? Seriously, what is the best strategy to scale up globally?
Okay, so I think it's more about, so scaling up is really about you also understanding what are the needs and the visions. More importantly, really the visions of those corporates, right? So if you know that this is a corporate, for example, that is putting a lot of importance and weight now on sustainability, you need to be able to at some point prove to them that you are in line with their vision, because there's nothing more important for when we look at global suppliers, it's their coverage, it's their service, and it's their vision, okay? And in some cases, you can get very good coverage, but the vision is just not there, you know? They're not really looking at how they are going to be sustainable. They're not, so again, another example with McCain and oil and whatever. McCain has a very clear strategy, for example, that we will stop using palm oil for sustainability reasons across the globe. And there are a few countries, including South Africa, by the way, that still use palm oil, and Colombia. And that's a vision, right? So, I mean, a supplier who does palm oil and is not going to plan on alternatives is obviously not someone we're going to work with. And mind you, palm oil is the cheapest oil. So again, we're not looking at cheap in that sense. We're actually looking at, do you understand my vision? Are you going to move forward with me there or not, right? So when it comes to the global scale, again, it's like I said, it's vision, it's your coverage. Are you able to also leverage, right? So another reason we go for global suppliers is because I don't want to have to discuss in each and every country certain approaches, certain payment terms. So I agree with you on a global level. Listen, well, we're going to have 90 days payment terms. That's it. You cascade it down to all of your other places. When you do a rollout of a pilot, so let's say we're coming with a new innovation. We're starting with that innovation in the US. And then rather than having to go to separate suppliers and explain to them what this innovation is and qualify them and test it and all that stuff, we actually want to be able to go with one global supplier and say, okay, we've tested this in the North America. It's working fine for us. We now want to replicate. And then they do a lot of work because they also have their own global team that is able to then go and talk within. So it saves us a bit of energy and time and all of that stuff. And if there's any problem, we can then go to the global team and say, okay, how do we sort this out? Right? So in many cases, you will have some local nuances happening. And what we would then go is like, okay, I'll talk to the global team. And that's how we sort it out.
Okay, Shereen, I think we're going to run out of time. So I think we should just move to the case study. Two that I want you to just be conscious of, but not answer right now. You may be able to answer it as part of the case study work. One was, what sustainability trends are coming up? E.g., you just mentioned palm oil. What's the alternatives and how do we stay ahead of sustainability trends? And then the other one was about, there's a lot of talk about SDGs. What's McCain doing to link in with SDGs and suppliers? If you can just keep those in mind as you continue.
Okay. All right, will do. Okay, right. Okay, so here's a case study. I'm going to read it out loud, but you also can read it along with me. So Giants Whole Food and Veg requires the services of a local media agency effective Jan 1, 2020. The responsible agency will assume all South Africa above the line media buying and planning services across predominantly, but not limited to, TV and digital media platforms for some of the most notable household brands. The agency will oversee these responsibilities across various categories such as farm fresh, frozen vegetables, and ready-made meals. Through the following request for proposal, we seek a local strategic agency partner able to deliver improved media performance and exceptional commercial value. The estimated annual media spend is 25 million rand. We welcome your participation and look forward to your proposal. Kindly complete the attached templates and exercises along with your proposal by no later than midday November 1st, 2019. And you have two appendices. One is a remuneration template, and the other is a TV scheduling test. What do you think is missing in this RFP, given what we were talking about? So you can all put in the chat box. I just want to see like if you kind of get the vibe of what we're talking about from the previous slides.
Okay, nothing in the chat box yet on this. So I don't know if anyone's wanting to put something what's missing in the chat box. So somebody's put scope of work is missing.
Okay.
On my side, I can't see if anyone's typing. So I think we just
think of all the things we've been talking about, you know, like terms, contracts.
Okay, payment terms has come in, organization, strategy, intention has just come in, qualifications. Okay, there's nothing else streaming.
So the terminology might not be clear for everyone, but scheduling test, for example, is a sort of qualification because that's how we put them to test to see how they're going to do the TV scheduling for us.
Okay, technical specification, assessment criteria.
Yeah.
What's your vision? How do you leverage coverage? Let me just scroll up. Okay, quite a few coming in now. Contract, assessment criteria. I'm not sure if I'm reading the same things now. Technical specifications. Yeah, I think that they're kind of doing the same things now. Yeah.
Perfect. Okay. So yeah, I think people are getting the gist of it.
Yeah.
Okay. So here's more or less what the ideal brief would look like, right? So it's pretty much the part on the top is exactly the same. We're telling you what the media spend is going to be, when are the services starting, which kind of brands you're going to be working on, and so on. But then the very important part is the criteria part, right? So your remuneration, what is the weighting we're putting on that? Your TV commercial terms, your TV scheduling test, which is the technical side of thing. The BEE compliance, and that's very specific to South Africa. I apologize if there's anyone from any other country, but it's really more like a very important criteria that all companies are being audited for right now, and is more about also, I would look at it, you know, doing the right thing. So I would even look at it from the sustainability big pillars of, you know, doing the right thing. And then payment terms, right? So now you're kind of understanding that if you don't do well on TV commercial terms, for example, that's kind of really gonna push you off the assessment, okay? So, all right, so here's what we got, okay? And that's very like top line. If people can put in the chat box, or Paul, Vanessa, if we can, who would you choose out of those, right? So here we're looking at total cost of ownership, and that's very important because that's where we're saying we're balancing everything. We're balancing your commercial proposal. We're balancing what kind of risk are we putting ourselves in if we go with supplier X versus Y. What is your quality? What is your performance? What is your efficiency? So it's really the total cost. We call it total cost because all of these things actually contribute to the cost. So if you have a low price, but then you're going to put us through a lot of risk, that is going to cost us money. You're going to give us like off quality products or service, which means downtimes on our lines, or it means, your labor people are turnover and then we don't have people running the lines, your security service is not as good. All of these things actually cost us money. So we really look at the whole picture, and it's not just like, oh, that seems to be the best commercial price, okay? So if you look at this table, we had an incumbent supplier, and their agency remuneration was 4.5 million. They were not giving us any savings on the commercial terms. We didn't need to do a scheduling test with them because they're not new, right? So we don't need to assess them one more time. Their BEE compliance was a level 1, and then the payment terms, I believe at the time were 60 or so. And then you have supplier 1, 2, and 3. You can see supplier 1 is at 4.9, supplier 2 is at 2.9, and supplier 3 is at 2.8. In terms of TV commercial terms, one is giving us a 15% saving on TV. One is giving us a 4.5 million on TV as a value. And supplier 3 is giving us a 2.5% saving on both TV and radio, with another rebate on Google. In terms of scheduling tests, supplier 1 scored 75%, supplier 3 scored 90%, supplier 2, which is the incumbent, we didn't put a score for them because they were obviously the same supplier. And then the BE compliance level 1, QSE level 1, level 2, payment terms, 75 days from supplier 1, 120 days from supplier 2, and 120 days from supplier 3. Who do you think we would select and why? And based on what, right? So you don't have to tell me based on what right now, because I think that's going to be too much in the chat box, but I'd really like to see what people think, like who the winning supplier is going to be. Or you don't have enough information to make the decision.
Okay, no responses yet.
Okay.
While we're waiting, somebody asked, how would we know as suppliers that we're aligned to your strategy, especially if it's the first time we're doing business with McCain?
Okay, let me answer it quickly. So the quickest way of doing this is read about your supplier. Most of corporates have their sustainability visions announced, have their visions announced, have their their ethics, their ethic code, the way they conduct business, everything is there for suppliers actually to see it, and for anyone for that matter to actually see it, even consumers. So go invest that time to actually know about your client and your corporate. And again, we're talking about big corporates here, but even if they're small clients, just try to approach them. If you don't get that information on the internet, and I promise you most of it will be there, then ask the questions. You know, it's like, we want to know what are you looking forward to? Where do you plan to have, where are you planning to open more offices or more manufacturing sites or so on, so that you can also start putting your plans around that if you actually want to grow with that corporate. And that kind of understands, that also answers the question to the other on sustainability trends. If anyone goes on the McCain website, you will see that we have announced, it's been a month already, I think, that we've announced our sustainability vision and the pillars that we're working on. For the matter of palm oil in specific, it really depends on the country. But the best alternatives for palm oil that companies would be looking at would be sunflower oil or cottonseed oil, but again, really depending on the country. Soybean in some cases. And that's how you would, you wouldn't see, for example, if you go on the website, you would see that, yes, we want to stop palm oil for obvious reasons, and the damage it does to the forests and so on. But it's not, you might not necessarily know what the alternative is, right? So once you reach out to the client and to the corporate and say, hey, we've heard about that, what kind of other oils are you looking at? Although you should also be the one bringing that knowledge to the corporate and saying, okay, we've heard that you guys actually want to, move out of palm oil. We think we could develop with you an alternative, and here you go. The market has, like, our main market in, let's say, Argentina is all about sunflower oil, right? So it wouldn't really make sense that someone would come and say in Argentina, yeah, we're probably going to give you soybean oil, right? So that also shows that they don't really understand the market that they're in.
Okay, a couple of answers. One is supplier two, according to weighting criteria, cost savings, and the fact that they have worked with the company. Another one is, how do we determine the value of the 2.5% saving and the 10% Google rebate? So I think that's not enough information. I think those were the two.
Just two? We only got two responses? Okay.
Did I miss one? I don't think so. Yeah.
Okay, so pretty much there's not detailed information, like it's not all in here, right? So like you can't compare what the 15% is necessarily versus the 2.5 because you don't know how much spend of the 25 million falls into TV and how much falls into digital and how much falls into radio, right? So that's one. And we'll go now into how we go into the detailed way of looking at it, right? Oops. Okay, so first thing is, we don't know, for example, supplier one, who quoted at 4.9 million, actually quoted for, they're putting 6.8 FTEs as resources, right? So unless you also understand how many FTEs are behind this, this amount, what is the markup? There's so many things that you cannot say that, okay, no, actually supplier 3, who is the cheapest at 2.8 is actually the best, right? So in this case, what we would do is we would say, okay, what are the number of FTEs per each, right? And if you go to the line right before the end that says total cost per FTE, supplier 1 is actually costing 700, and it's really like on average, right? We know that some FTEs are senior, some are junior, so it's not like, it's not spread out exactly, but it gives you the feel of how much am I actually paying per FTE, right? So if I kind of make them all at 5 FTEs and work out the number, you will find out that supplier 2 becomes the cheapest in that sense, because I can then go and mandate and say, okay, you know what? I think 6.8 is a bit too much. But if I knew that their cost per FTE was good and they drop it down to 5 FTEs, in that case, they might actually be more competitive than the others, right? So I'm not necessarily taking the final value and saying, oh my God, they're quoting for 5 million and that's it, right? Then you can see the markup as well, right? So supplier 1 actually has, supplier 3 actually has the lowest markup, right? Which then can be that I go to the supplier later on that I'm more comfortable with for other reasons and say, okay, can we discuss your markup? Can we go for maybe 7.5% or something, right? So this kind of gives you the visibility of where each one of them is more competitive than the other and what is actually more important for you, right? So, so I'm not going to go into like everyone by detail, but this is how far we go, right? So we're actually going to take that 4.5 and break it down and say, okay, direct costs is costing them 2.4, 1.6, and so on. Indirect costs, which are overheads, you can see that supplier 1 has very high overheads. So you kind of see, okay, in terms of indirect cost, supplier 2 is the highest. However, in terms of markup, supplier 3 is the lowest. In terms of cost per FTE, it ends up that supplier 2 is actually the cheapest. And then you compare versus your baseline, right? So our baseline is our incumbent supplier in terms of cost. Supplier 1 is 26% higher than our baseline. Supplier 2, which is the incumbent themselves, actually went down with their prices by 12%. And supplier 3 is at 9% more, okay? So the observations that we had here is that supplier 1 has the highest number of resources, but also the most expensive per FTE. And it's probably not what we want, right? So like we already know this work can be done by X number of FTEs. They're the experts, but we also have a view, right? So like if someone came in and said, I'm going to give you 10 FTEs, I'm like, why? Why do I need FTEs? Do what with with 10 people on my account? Supplier 2, which is the incumbent, the cost per FTE has reduced, as we have shown, right? More details that we personally, we had, was that the regional agencies also support is going to be part of this. So that's part of the question of global. So we have the regional and global team in that case, because they were also very concerned of losing business. They stepped in, brought in the regional and global people and said, listen, we will be visiting every quarter. We will be doing this and that. We will make sure that, we're bringing in the learnings from other global teams, which is then becomes more appealing to us because we're a global company and we want to have global support. Supplier 3, like I said, is the most competitive in terms of their cost. However, with the least number of resources. So we were kind of worried, do we really think 4.5 people are going to deliver this for us? Okay. And the fee may not be sustainable. So they might be next year and they're like, hey, we cannot sustain, we need more FTEs and hence your price is going to go up. So what you kind of save right now is what you eventually lose in the future. Okay. Next step we actually went into is the resourcing allocation. So when I was talking about the org structure and understanding who is going to be on our account and all of these things, this is how far we also go. So again, without going into all of the details, but you can see that the number of FTEs is people in different scopes, right? So one person, some people are in digital, some people are doing the buying, some people are the client service and so on. And then when we looked at it, we were actually looking okay, for me, for example, scheduling might be very important, right? And then I go and I see that supplier 3 has only one person on scheduling. Again, I don't think that person is going to be able to meet the scope of what we require, right? So you will see, again, in the observations, we would say that the lowest weighting resourcing behind buying came from them, while buying accounts for 80% of our scope of work, right? So this is so critical that how could they only put one person out of 6.8 on this, right? So it also gives an indication that they might not have read the scope of work properly. They're not figuring out what is the key important thing for the corporate. And they're just, throwing in the way they think it's gonna be the best way, right? Supplier 2, there's an average weighting of resources. Again, obviously that's coming from their experience with us being the incumbent, but also the other suppliers have wide experience with other corporates, right? So the expectation from them is that they kind of know what they're doing. And then supplier 3 is just giving 1, 1, 1, 1, 1 and 0.5, and you're okay, do they really know what they're talking about here? So that doesn't give us, the confidence that they actually know what is, what we're looking for. And that's why I was saying it could be of two reasons. It could be that our scope of work was an unclear scope of work. And people were just we don't really know, so we're just going to throw in what we think might work out. Or we actually had a good scope of work, which we did. And people were just not trying to read, not even between the lines. They're just not trying to understand what we're looking for. Maybe using, other examples of how they serve other clients, and it could be a very different medium, right? Another, a competitor might be putting more money on radio than we are, and hence requires a whole different strategy. But we had mentioned all the details in the scope of work. Okay. I think I'm okay on time. Okay, and then on the commercial terms, and someone made that very good comment is, okay, what does it mean? What does your 15% actually mean to me? What does the 2.5 mean to me? Okay, so you'll see that supplier 1, their 15% savings comes up to only on TV, right? Because you can see that the 25 million, 15 million is being spent on TV, 5.5 million is being spent on digital, and 4.5 is being spent on radio. So the 15% that comes is going to apply on the 15 million that comes to 2.25 million. Supplier 2 gave us an exact amount. It was not a percentage, it was a 4.5 million, which actually translates into a 37% TV savings. And then supplier 3 is giving us a 2.5%. You can see it's very little money. and they don't have the scale to negotiate with the TV stations. So that's basically on the commercial side. When it came to BEE, again, you know, we really also went into the details of, it's not just a level 1, right? You could be a level 1, but then because you have a good woman, 30% Black ownership, that kind of gives us more points as a client. So we actually went into all of the details. You can see like the recognition level that we would get out of supplier 1 is 125%, out of supplier 2 is 135, and out of supplier 3 is 125, which then makes supplier 2 again the best here. And the one that was also very important for us was that supplier 2 had a plan in place to improve their Black ownership, and they actually gave a deadline. They were like, within 1 year, we would have achieved a Black ownership of more than 51% and a Black female ownership of more than 30%. Supplier 3 very openly said, we have no plans to do anything around the ownership. Supplier 1 was a more complicated situation because they had a holding company and there was a lot of complications there. But then they said, okay, they might do something within 2 years. Okay. So as everyone kind of by now should have expected, supplier 2 was the most favorable. And the reason was, again, they gave a total value, right? So that was the best total value. They're giving us the best in terms of savings from a commercial standpoint. They have plans to improve their Black, their Black ownership, which is important for us, which is both in line from a vision standpoint and also important for us in terms of our scoring. There are no transition costs involved because they are the incumbent. And, you know, they have good relationships with the stations and so on. So that's actually also going to be helpful for us. So, so let me take any questions on this one before I just have some closing remarks and we take the general Q&A.
I don't think there's any additional questions right now. Let me just quickly scroll up. There's one, just as a matter of interest, would you choose an EME supplier who ticks all the boxes? I guess maybe that's been answered. There was another section where I think I missed something. Yeah, actually, carry on. I'll keep it.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So I think just in terms of other points to consider, and I think that's a very important one, is do not charge the client a premium for something they don't need. Okay. And I see that a lot, right? It's like, hey, but I'm giving you a Jaguar, but you know what? I didn't ask you for a Jaguar. I need a Mercedes and I know that's what I need. So unless in those cases, and we're not saying don't say that you have something premium. In those cases, make sure you're attending to what your client is asking for, give them what they need, and then tell them, but by the way, I have something that's actually better, comes at a premium price, but the advantage could be 1, 2, 3, right? And let them assess. But the moment you ignore what I'm asking you for, and you come with something that I have not asked for, even if it's better, and I acknowledge that it's better, it's very simply, I don't need it. Why are you first not giving me what I'm asking for? And the second thing is, why are you asking me to pay more for something I didn't ask for, right? So this is something that I've very, very commonly seen in submissions that we get. And that's really the answer that we always give, you know, like, I'm glad you have something better. I'm happy to look at it once I've looked at what I need first. And then if I see that, oh, you know what, I'll actually pay a 10% more, but these are all the extra values that I'm going to get, I can then also take it back to the business and say, guys, we might actually, let's consider this because, you know, like maybe I won't have to change the specs or like move the product from the shelf. If I would normally like in 1 year, I might actually go for 1.5 years without having to remove it and pay a little bit extra. But I need to be able to start from my baseline, right? So if my baseline is my product goes on the shelf for 1 year and that's how much it costs. And then you tell me, I will help you keep your product on shelf for a month, for 1.5 years, for only that much more, I need to be able to make the comparison, right? So if you don't give me your baseline price that I asked for, I won't be able to make the comparison. And hence I would just tell you, I'm not interested in your premium thing, right? The other thing is relationship management, right? So it is very important that maintain the relationship, even if you're not getting the business yet. You never know. Try to be top of mind of your corporate, that when something comes up, it's like, oh, you know who I'm thinking of right now? It's that person, because we've been in touch, we've talked, I know what they're doing, they're sharing with me their vision. They actually understand what my company is all about. And you know, they're trying to build in that kind of like convergence with what we're looking for, right? So eventually something might come up. If it doesn't come up for me, it might come up for someone else, where I would go, hey, you know what? I know of this very good supplier. We haven't been able to use them, but why don't you guys try them out? And corporates talk to each other, right? The other one is bring value in some form, okay? And to me, I think for me, that is like the most important. When I know that I can pick up the phone sometimes and talk to a supplier and say, hey, did you hear about this new regulation? Or even without me calling, you know, they would just say, by the way, there's this new regulation we heard about, this might be the impact of it. We might want to think about so-and-so, even if they're not going to tell me what to think about. Just giving me that piece of information, because they're out there in the market, really makes me value the supplier much more, because it's not like they're not only reactive, they're actually coming in and telling us what's, you know, what's going on. Ethical competitor knowledge, right? So there are things that you as a supplier can tell me about my competitor. Ethical frame, right? So for example, I can go and pick a packaging of a competitor and do my analysis in the lab and say, yeah, you know what? I am using a thickness of 60 micron. My competitor is actually using 55, right? Without me having to do that, if you know, you can actually tell me, because this is something that is out there in the market, that if someone does the, you know, the reverse engineering of it, is going to figure it out. Obviously, they're not ethical. You can't tell me how much your competitor is buying for, and all of these things, right? So there is a limit to what can be shared, but we find that very important information as well, you know, and like someone would send me and say, oh, by the way, your competitor is going to open an office in Durban.
When are they going to get the feedback?
This is all important information, because then it tells us a few things about the market that we then see how to react to it, and so on. So we value these kind of information, and brings a lot of value, even if you're not a current supplier, but you're engaging and you're bringing that kind of value. And at some point I would say, okay, you know what, this is a supplier that actually knows the market and has the right knowledge, and we should find a way to work with them. So that's it for me. If you have any questions.
Just one comment, which was typed to me. I'm waiting to see if anybody else makes a comment. Thanks, Shereen, this is fabulous. So the comment that came in was around, isn't it the norm that the incumbent usually gets selected, and it's very difficult to break in, especially with the corporates, and these things take a lot of our times.
Yeah, a good incumbent, yes. Okay, we're not saying that it's not hard. Why would you, if you have a strategic relationship, if the supplier is doing well, but you never know, right? So if you don't know, don't assume. We have so many incumbents that have given us hell. And when we run, you know, when we run an RFQ, it's because we actually want to look for others, right? And we're not saying it's going to be easy, right? And if our incumbent, in this case, for example, did not go like all the way, those guys like really killed themselves to maintain the business. They didn't maintain it just because they were the incumbent, trust me. So, so no, that is not, it's common if it's a good incumbent. However, you don't know the details that the corporate knows. It might be one thing for us that is not okay with this incumbent, right? It might be that, again, one of the things that are important for us in terms of our vision is not gonna be fulfilled with this incumbent. So we try to find a way to like pull out without, you know, we also have like rules for pulling out of incumbents where you know, you can't be like, you know, 50% of their business and then pull out completely. Yeah, you're screwing them up basically, right? So like you can't do these things, right? So and if possible to maintain the incumbent and grow the relationship and so on, which in that case, if we're very happy with the incumbent, we usually wouldn't really go for an RFQ. We might just go for a renegotiation, do our own market analysis to see if we're paying the right price or not, or should cost analysis, which we spoke about in webinar 1. So we do kind of our homework and then say, okay, let's just renegotiate. Incumbents also sometimes get very complacent, and we're not okay with that. You don't want, even if it's an incumbent and you have a great relationship, they shouldn't take you for granted, and you shouldn't be, you know, it just shouldn't be like, yeah, we're gonna stay. So they kind of get, you know, complacent and laid back and whatever. That doesn't work. We're always looking for the right value. We're always looking for the best innovation out there. We're always looking for who is bringing us, you know, the right value and the knowledge and the expertise and all of that. So don't make that assumption.
Thanks, Shereen. That's amazing. I'm just waiting to see if there's any more questions. I think the one question I didn't answer on my side was about the link to the SDGs. What's McCain doing around helping women to put projects together for the SDGs? I think was the way it read.
Right. So we have also announced that as part of the sustainability. So we're actually showing, you know, which SDGs we're going to be linking to be very specific about women. And I don't want to just answer for South Africa. I mean, there is work that South Africa is trying to do. If I'm talking about obviously McCain. However, there is a global kind of approach. It's still also kind of being cooked in a way. So like, I can't say that we're necessarily, you know, like ahead and we've been doing this for a long time and so on, but there's a huge appetite of wanting to put this in place. So in most regions and in many countries, there are things moving now. There's going to be also an expectation from the local regions that they kind of go back to global and say, okay, here's our plan on not just supplier diversity, like overall diversity and inclusion and everything that is in line with the sustainability vision. And actually, like, this is the first time that McCain puts out this sustainability vision out there for everyone. So we've made very clear, you know, official commitments and global commitments. Our CEO sitting on many of the committees as well, you know, and you know, the organizations that are trying to make a change, obviously more from an agriculture side, but also things related to, you know, our carbon footprint and our use of plastic and our use of oil and all that. So there is work that is happening. Again, it might not be as advanced as other corporates yet, but there's a very, very, very dedicated vision of, okay, we're gonna get this with clear dates and a clear commitment from everyone.
Awesome. Another one I missed was around, Shereen, as you sit in a global office, how can you help South African WBEs get global opportunities?
So I'm not really sitting in a global office anymore. I will be very much focusing on Latin America. I think the way we do it is, once you've proven a success in the local country, then we can also start talking about global, right? So I think it usually comes like when I have worked with a supplier and then I go and I talk to the team, to my other counterparts in the regions and say, guys, this supplier has been, and I've done that, by the way, now, even when we were talking about Latin America, I've had very good experience with a certain big temporary labor company back like 7 years ago. And I was like, okay, you know what, why is every region working with one like agency and there's no kind of like, so we're trying to put a strategy together and say, okay, you know what, let's then, but it all comes from experience, right? And someone might say, hey, listen, X supplier or agency, we've never tried it in McCain. They will be very reluctant to take that over, right? But if someone in continental Europe comes and says, listen, we've had very good engagement with the supplier, we know they exist in most of the other regions, guys in Latin America, why don't you try them out? Why don't you pull them in your RFQ and see what's going to happen? And that's the way global like discussions happen. It's because I don't necessarily have to be in part of the global team. I could be covering a region, but we have global strategies, right? So like we talk, we have like monthly calls between like people managing direct and indirect and all of these things. And we actually talk about these suppliers. So my advice is prove your success locally first, and then you will be able to have ambassadors for you that actually go and say, I want to do this. And just like WeConnect, by the way. So like, that's what I'm doing with WeConnect. I went to Latin America and I'm like, guys, I want to work with WeConnect. I've had such an incredible experience here. I know they exist in all of these countries. Can we please talk to them? Right? So that's how it happens. And it's not necessarily with everyone. I can go and say, by the way, my experience with X was not that great. I kind of like won't be, I won't be encouraging us to get involved with them because my experience was just not a good one. So any more questions, comments? We have 2 minutes.
No, I think we're kind of at the end. So your parting shots, and then I'll close the call and thank the many ladies who are still holding on the call, which has been fantastic.
Thanks everyone. It was amazing. I will see if I can actually continue to support Jean even when I'm sitting there, because I mean, I love Jean. She's a great friend. She's a huge inspiration. Everyone knows that. There's so many women also here that I've had a wonderful relationship with. And it breaks my heart that I would think that that's it for me, So happy to always support South Africa in every way I can. And please, anyone, feel free to reach to me on LinkedIn about what we're talking here, mentoring, coaching. I spoke that with Jean before. Alumni Grants Committee. So just bring it on, ladies.
Thank you, Shereen. Thank you so much. This was so informative. I think we have to just get the slides and just reabsorb and re-review. There was a lot of information there. But thank you as always. Firstly, as WeConnect International, the global organization that we are, that people like you have helped us to grow, not only in South Africa now, also going to Latin America and carrying the flag. So we really appreciate your championing women-owned businesses at this time, and as you've always done. And I know I speak on behalf of all the ladies when we say we absolutely love you. We already miss you. And like I said at the beginning, we're gonna have to find a way to troll you back from Brazil, but we'll be on planes going out there too. So thank you everybody who joined for this session. If you're not registered with WeConnect International, please do so. We have amazing people like Shereen who help us to find opportunities for women-owned businesses. We're going to be officially saying farewell to Shereen on the 9th of October. So if you're a weebie, look out for the invitation. It's going to be amazing. And thank you, everybody. This is great. And we'll share the slides. We'll share the recording. Just be a little bit patient with us, please, because it goes to head office in Washington, and then they'll upload it on the YouTube channel. Please look at our social media, the Facebook, LinkedIn, Twitter, and share this information with other people as well. I know Shereen's very active on LinkedIn, and we were active even this morning on LinkedIn. So show McCain how wonderful that she is and how much we love her. Thank you, everybody. Have a great evening. I wish I had a glass of wine in my hand. Cheers to all.
Cheers to the beginning of the week.
Cheers to the beginning of the week. And
thank you.
Enjoy the holiday. 24th is a holiday, so please enjoy it. Be safe at this time. We know that COVID hasn't completely disappeared, but thank you so much, everybody, for joining us. We really, really appreciate you. Thanks, Shereen.
Thank you. Thanks, Jean. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks, Shereen. Bye.
Bye.
Bye, Shereen. Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Thanks, everybody. I saw the names. Thank you for joining. Thank you so much. Amazing. Awesome.
Thank you, ladies.
Thank you, Shereen.